It seemed like any other neighborhood, quiet, unassuming, a picture of the American dream. Children laughed and played, lawns were perfectly manicured, and families went about their day-to-day lives. But behind one of these pristine doors, a far more sinister story was unfolding. It was a secret that festered for decades, lurking in the shadows, as an ordinary man concealed a monstrous identity. This is the story of Dennis Rader, the man behind the mask, the BTK Killer. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Behind the Mask, the ordinary life of Dennis Rader. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the eldest of 4 sons. Raised in a strict Catholic household, Dennis's life seemed to follow a conventional path. His family attended church regularly, and like many young boys of his time, Dennis was involved in Boy Scouts. His parents were hardworking, trying to ensure a stable household. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy, dark and disturbing fantasies began to take root. For Dennis, the seeds of his sadistic desires were sown early on, during a seemingly innocent childhood. Growing up in the suburbs of Wichita, Kansas, Dennis appeared to be just another kid in the neighborhood. But by his teenage years, he had already begun torturing and killing small animals for pleasure, a troubling indicator that would later evolve into something far more dangerous. Such behavior is often dismissed as typical childhood mischief, but in Dennis's case, it was the foundation of a much darker reality. Even then, the mask of normalcy was firmly in place. After graduating from Wichita Heights High School, Dennis attended Kansas Wesleyan University. However, he proved to be a mediocre student and was dropped after only 1 year. This academic failure didn't seem to weigh heavily on him, as he later found more interest in fulfilling his darker desires. He briefly served in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970, a time when his mask of normalcy was still intact. In the eyes of his community, Dennis was disciplined and patriotic, a man doing his duty for his country. But beneath the surface, the fantasies were festering, growing ever more intense. Upon his return to Wichita, Dennis found work at an IGA supermarket where his mother was employed as a bookkeeper. It was a simple life, one that gave no indication of the horrors that lay ahead. Then in 1971, he married Paula Dietz. Together, they had 2 children, Carrie and Brian. For years, Dennis seemed to be the perfect husband and father. He worked various jobs, including as an assembler for Coleman Company, and he later attended Butler County Community College, earning an associate degree in electronics engineering technology in 1973. Eventually, he earned a bachelor's degree in science, majoring in administration of justice. But even as Dennis worked to better himself, his dark desires never left him. Instead, they intensified, slowly transforming him into something far more sinister. The start of a killing spree. By 1974, Dennis was working for ADT Security Services, a job that gave him access to something he had never had before: people's homes. Installing security alarms allowed him to observe people's lives up close, to see their vulnerabilities and to feed the growing hunger inside him. He would soon cross the line from fantasy to reality in a brutal and unforgivable way. On January 15, 1974, Dennis Rader committed his first murder. He broke into the home of the Otero family, Joseph, Julie, and their 2 young children, Josephine and Joseph Jr. What he did inside that house would shock the community to its core. The family was found bound, tortured, and murdered in their Wichita home, followed by a chilling signature signed as BTK. It was a crime so horrific that the police were left stunned. Yet they had no idea that this was only the beginning. In the months that followed, Dennis would continue his killing spree. His next victim was Catherine Bright, murdered in April 1974. Dennis broke into her home and brutally attacked her. Her brother Kevin was present, and Dennis shot him twice, though miraculously, Kevin survived. Catherine wasn't as fortunate. Dennis stabbed her multiple times, leaving the crime scene as quietly as he had entered it. Each killing fed his dark fantasies, and Dennis grew more confident, more emboldened. He learned to bide his time, to take long breaks between murders to avoid suspicion, but he never truly stopped. His killings became more methodical, more calculated, and each time, he took something with him, a keepsake from his female victims, usually their undergarments, as trophies of his conquests. Dennis's next notable murder occurred in 1977 when he killed Shirley Vian. By now, he had refined his methods, stalking his victims for weeks, learning their routines, and selecting the moment to strike with chilling precision. He learned to blend in with the everyday life of Wichita. He was a family man, a community leader, a Cub Scout leader, even a church president. No one suspected that behind this facade was a man who reveled in torturing and killing women. In his mind, he was both predator and provider, meticulously hiding his darker side from the world. Then in 1985, Dennis struck again, this time even closer to home. Maureen Hedge, his neighbor, lived just a few blocks away from him. He broke into her home, strangled her, and took her body to a church where he photographed her before disposing of her remains. His proximity to the victims and the boldness of these acts showed his growing confidence in evading capture. The following year, he killed Vicky Vagerle, a young mother. Posing as a telephone repairman, he entered her home, strangled her, and again photographed the scene. Despite these horrifying acts, Dennis's facade never cracked. His family and community remained unaware of the monster in their midst. Dennis's final victim, Dolores Davis, was killed in 1991. Again, Dennis followed his usual pattern, breaking into her home, strangling her, and disposing of her body in a remote location. And then suddenly, the murders stopped. For over a decade, Dennis disappeared into his ordinary life. But why? Was he being cautious because of the ongoing investigation? Or had something else caused him to pause? It is impossible to say for certain, but what is clear is that the BTK Killer was far from finished. For years, the BTK Killer remained an elusive figure, a ghost who taunted the police and media with letters filled with gruesome details of his crimes. He craved recognition, demanded to be feared, but despite his arrogance, Dennis Rader managed to keep his double life intact. It wasn't until 2004 that his fatal mistake would lead to his capture. Hungry for attention and recognition, Dennis resumed communication with the media after years of silence. He sent a floppy disk to the press, confident that it could not be traced back to him. But this time, the police were ready. Using forensic technology, police were able to trace the metadata on the floppy disk back to the Christ Lutheran Church, where Dennis Rader was an active member. In February 2005, after decades of evading capture, Dennis was finally arrested while driving home. DNA evidence linked him to the murders, and Dennis, ever the egotist, eventually confessed to his crimes in graphic detail. The community was left in shock. How could a man who had been a pillar of the community, a loving father and husband, be the same man who had terrorized the city for decades? Psychological depths. What made BTK tick? In the end, Dennis was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, ensuring that he would never be free again. His wife immediately filed for divorce, and his children were left grappling with the knowledge that their father was a cold-blooded serial killer. Dennis had hidden his true self so well, for so long, that even those closest to him had no idea. But for those who looked closely, the signs were always there. Neighbors reported that Dennis could be overzealous, strict, and sometimes even menacing. He had once killed a neighbor's dog for no reason. He harassed women in his community, but these behaviors were never enough to raise serious alarm. It wasn't until he was arrested that the full picture of his depravity came into focus. His story serves as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always come in the form we expect. It can be lurking right next door, wearing the mask of normalcy. Dennis Rader's story has been immortalized in pop culture, featured in the Netflix series Mindhunter. The show delves into the minds of convicted murderers, including Rader, whose crimes spanned over 2 decades. In the end, the BTK Killer finally got the attention he craved, though not in the way he may have imagined. The case of Dennis Rader reminds us that evil can wear the most ordinary of masks. His story, like others, raises questions about the factors that shape a serial killer. If you want to explore more unsettling stories like this, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and click the bell icon. Join us on our next journey into the unknown. Until then, remember, not everything is as it seems.